Hello everyone. Today we're going to do another lesson from the 2006 uh, English textbook for second PU. It's a lesson called Is Creativity Suppressed by Knowledge by the Greek student Sophia Skoufaki, right? So Sophia Skoufaki, she wrote the following essay in her first semester in college in the United States. It was written in order to fulfill an assignment for a composition course in English. Sophia was educated in Greece until she came to the United States as a high school student. So, first we'll look at the title of the lesson: Is Creativity Suppressed by Knowledge? So, what it means is for a person to be creative, he has to be spontaneous. He has to think of things on his toes. That the ideas have to come to him all of a sudden. This is exciting. Creativity is exciting. But is creativity suppressed by knowledge? Knowledge means that you acquire a great deal of facts, you acquire a great deal of knowledge by memorizing, by rote learning, and so on and so forth, learning things by heart. So, if you learn too many things by heart, if you are memorizing things all the time, is your creativity suppressed? That is the theme of the essay. So, first, Sophia, she quotes an essay by another author called Kiho. Kiho is an Indonesian. So the title, what it says is, in his essay, we should cherish our children's freedom to think. Kiho supports the American system of education. So Kiho is an Indonesian, and he has also immigrated to the United States, and he has written an essay whose title is, we should cherish our children's freedom to think. So, our children's freedom to think, they must be able to think out things on their own. They must not be taught all the time. So, they must be able to learn independently. How can this be done? So, that's the theme of Keyhoe's essay. We should cherish our children's freedom to think. Children should not be taught to do this or to do that or to have too many limitations put on their actions, put on their freedom. So we should cherish our children's freedom to think. So Kehoe in that essay supports the American system of education. So the American system of education apparently gives children a great deal of freedom to work out things for themselves. So it continues. He expresses disappointment with the Indonesian way of teaching that he had experienced. So Kehoe, as I said, he is from Indonesia. So the Indonesian way of teaching, uh, probably it lays a great deal of emphasis on memorization. So Kehoe finds that system of education in Indonesia is disappointing. As he points out, American schools tend to teach students how to develop their creativity more rather than try to stuff their heads with knowledge. So, American schools tend to teach students how to develop their creativity more. So, they should put two and two together, so to speak. Two and two together means they're given two facts, they must learn to put a third fact, derive a new fact from the two they have been given. So, they should be creative, right? So American schools tend to develop the students' creativity more rather than try to stuff their heads with knowledge. So that is the system of education is prevalent in many of the countries. They try to stuff the children's heads with knowledge. They have to memorize. They have to by heart and things like that. Ho always had to memorize things and to acquire as much knowledge as he could from books, while his son in California learned practical things through experience. So Ho had to memorize a lot of things, while his son, Kehoe, immigrated to the US. His son entered a school in California, and his son learned practical things through experience. So, practical things. So, how to do things in the real world, right? And it was a hands-on experience that Kehoe's son had, right? Ho admires the approach of his son's schools, but I hesitate to endorse it. So Kehoe admires the approach of his son's school. That is, it lays stress on creativity. But Sophia Skoufaki says, I hesitate to endorse it. Endorse means she hesitates to support it. So she doesn't wholeheartedly praise the creative system of education. She also feels that there is a great deal of importance to be given to the traditional system of learning, that is rote memorization. So she says she hesitates to endorse or support the American system of education. She hesitates to endorse or support Kehoe's point of view. Ho connects this focus on creativity and practicality with the country's strength. So, the country we're speaking about is America. The strength of America lies in its children. So, the children are taught from a very young age to think out things, to work out things for themselves. Uh, and so, this country has grown strong, right? So, the whole country is nothing but the sum of its people, nothing but the sum of its citizens. So, the country's strength is dependent on the creativity and practicality which the students receive in American high schools. He asked why so many people complain about the American system of education since America is a country of innovation. So America is a country of innovation. Now the highest number of Nobel Prize winners is from America. You take any field and you find that there are innovators, there are inventive geniuses like Thomas Edison, and you know that's in science, and you have authors like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau in literature. So America is a country of innovation. So Ho wonders why so many people complain about the American education system, since America is a country of innovation. Continues, this innovativeness is tied to the fact that public schools provide children with the opportunity to be creative. So the innovativeness in the American mind, in the mind of American people, the innovativeness in the mind of American people is tied strongly to the fact that public schools provide children with the opportunity to be creative. So they learn from a very young age to be creative. So Sophia now states her point of view. I think I found the answer on excursion to the Laguna Beach Museum of Art, where the work of school children was on exhibit. So Laguna Beach is in Florida, and when she entered high school in the United States, Sophia Skoufaki went on school excursion to the Laguna Beach Museum of Art, where the work of school children was on exhibit. So the school children had made a lot and you know arranged an exhibition, and had exhibited many of their creative productions. They had transformed simple paper lunch bags into, among other things, a waterfall with flying fish. So they had made a waterfall with flying fish. So the fish would come out of the water, and they would go back into the water. The water was falling, and all this creative inventiveness they displayed, they'd made from simple paper lunch bags, right? So they'd made a lot of things with very ordinary material. So this obviously shows that American children are taught to be creative. So she says, I have to agree that Ho's observation is true. So Ho's observation that American schools tend to be creative, tend to teach the children creativity, that observation is true. The opportunity for creativity impressed me too when I first went to an American high school. So when she entered the American high school, she was impressed by the opportunity for creativity. I admired how much attention the teachers gave to students' works and talents. So the students, each student is different from the other. So we cannot say that all students have the same talent, right? So here, most of the students either take science or they take commerce or they take one of the major mainstream courses. But in America, each student is given an opportunity to develop his own individual talent, whether it's in music, whether it's in dancing, whether it's in drama, whether it's in literature. So the American teachers, they gave a lot of attention to students' work and talents. So they encourage the students to develop their talents more. I was impressed by the programs the school offered, the many different opportunities they gave students to do whatever they wanted, no matter how different and unique it was. So, in American high schools, the study program, the syllabus of the curriculum that are offered to the students, they have many different subjects. So it can be anything. As I said, it can be music, or it can be literature, or it can be even something like acting, or it can be, playwriting. So the schools offered a number of programs which impressed Sophia Skoufaki, and the students were always given different opportunities to do whatever they wanted, no matter how different and unique it was. So there may be only a single student in a class, but he was given the opportunity to develop his talent. I noticed that the students were always involved in activities, competitions, and exhibitions that are connected with their classes at school. So the students, they were always involved in activities, so that were connected with their classes at school. So in the classes, they were probably taught the theory, and they entered competitions, they engaged in activities, and they organized exhibitions, which showcased their skills, which brought out some practical results of the theory they learned in the classes. That is a way of learning that Ho supports. So Kehoe supports that way of learning. But Sophia, now she says, however, I don't agree that this is the best way to educate students. So she says this ought to be taken with a pinch of salt. That is, you must look at the plus points of the traditional method of education. The traditional method of education, of course, lays emphasis on rote memorization. So, Sophia says that this may not be the best way to educate students to emphasize their creativity. Ho wonders if you would prefer to stuff the developing little heads of our children with hundreds of geometry problems, the names of rivers in Brazil, and 50 lines from the Canterbury Tales. So the children, they're still young, they like to play more, and their minds are developing. So Ho wonders in his essay that whether children ought to stuff their heads, whether the teachers ought to stuff the heads of the little children with hundreds of geometry problems, the names of rivers in Brazil. So hundreds of geometry problems is taught in maths. The names of rivers in Brazil is taught in geography, and 50 lines from the Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales, of course, is from English literature. So the students have to memorize 50 lines from the Canterbury Tales, they have to memorize the names of rivers in Brazil, and they have to learn how to solve hundreds of geometry problems. He believes that by asking them to acquire much knowledge and take memorization seriously, we really retard the impulses of students and frustrate their opportunities for self-expression. So Kehoe believes that by asking them to acquire much knowledge. So knowledge, as I said, is it is static. Let's use the word static. It does not move. Once you've acquired the knowledge, it is fixed, right? So if you acquire much knowledge and take memorization seriously, really seriously, then we retard the impulses of students and frustrate their opportunities for self-expression. So what happens then is the impulses of students, their natural inclinations, their natural aptitudes, their natural interests, their natural wishes, what they wish to do, what they wish to study, what they're really interested in. These impulses are retarded. They're stopped, and children's opportunities for self-expression. How they how they bring out their talent in the real world. That talent, their self-expression is frustrated by asking them to take memorization seriously. While I agree that experimentation, free expressions of oneself, and creativity and innovation are important, I don't think that by learning geography, history, and math, or by studying literature, students underdevelop their impulses. So Sophia says that she believes that uh, we must consider no, we should not only consider experimentation, we should not only consider the free expression of oneself and creativity and innovation. Uh, these are taught in American schools. She says that while these are important, experimentation, free expression in oneself and creativity are important, she thinks that by learning geography, by memorizing the facts of geography or history or math, or by studying literature, students underdevelop their impulse. So, by memorizing, it doesn't in any way affect the minds of students to be creative. It doesn't affect the capacities of students to be creative, right? They don't underdevelop their impulses to be creative. So I think that these impulses develop in life by themselves, and that knowledge, even that boring, awful memorizing of cities and names of rivers, helps expand one's horizons and enlarges one's perspectives. So she says that rote memorization has its role to play. What is that? She says that if students were to memorize, and this memorization process is boring and it's awful, and they may have to memorize the names of cities and the names of rivers. But what actually goes on is that they're expanding one's horizons. They're sitting at home and they're learning about something in Brazil, or they're learning about something in Australia, or they're learning something about space. So what happens is by rote memorization, they're expanding the horizons, and it enlarges their perspectives. Perspectives are points of view, right? So it gives them, a real factual basis on which to base their actions, right? So memorization, even though it may be boring or it may be awful, even this memorization gives them facts with which they can, use in the real world. Besides this, she says there are some things students have to learn the way they are, otherwise they are misunderstood and mixed up. So, besides the importance of memorizing, there are some things students have to learn the way they are. So, some things they have to be taught the way they are. So, for example, if you say 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, there's only one way of teaching it. Or if you say that, the problems of geometry can be taught creatively, no doubt they can, but there's only one way of learning because the results are the same for all these factual subjects. Okay, if they learn it creatively, then there is a chance that they may be misunderstood and they may get the facts wrong and become mixed up. It is not flattering at all for America that our youngsters put Mussolini in the same category as Dostoevsky. So the American children were given a test, and those children, they put Mussolini, that is Benito Mussolini, the dictator, the butcher of Italy, who massacred millions of Jews, and in the Second World War, he was put in the same category as the great author Fyodor Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky and Mussolini, they were put in the same category on a test. This way of teaching creatively doesn't always yield correct results. Nevertheless, Hope believes that knowledge his son got in school was more useful than what he himself got in the Indonesian school. So the knowledge that Kiho acquired in the Indonesian school, many of the things he never used in his life, right? So, but Hope believes that the knowledge his son got in school was more useful in his real life. And so Kehoe says, unlike his counterparts in Asia and Europe, my son had studied creative geography. When he was only 6, he drew a map of the route that he traveled to get to school, including the streets and the name, the buildings and traffic signs and the houses that he passed. So this is creative geography, learning about directions, learning about landmarks, learning about the names of buildings, important buildings. So when he was only 6, Kehoe's son drew a map of the route that he traveled to get to school, and he named the streets, and he named the directions, and he named the important landmarks. Okay, so this sort of thing is more practical than the type of geography that Kehoe learned in his school in Indonesia. What Ho names creative geography, I would call development of common sense. So Sophia says that what is called creative geography, she would call the development of common sense. Of course, it's common sense to notice the buildings that you walk. It's common sense to to know whether to go left or right, whether you're turning east or whether you're turning south, things like that. So what Ho calls creative geography, Sophia calls the development of common sense, which is of course important. So it's important not to mix terms, and you should not call something that is obvious, you should not call it creative. But wouldn't students have a better sense of orientation if they studied world maps and knew where their country is located and where other countries which they hear about every day are in respect to their country? So on the news, children hear about other countries. So if they had studied world maps, right, and they knew where each country was, and they would have a sense of orientation. They would know a sense of direction about what is going on in the world, what they hear about in the news. So if they knew where their country is located and where other countries which they hear about are in respect to their country, so they should have a knowledge about the world, because nowadays it's a global society. So Sophia continues, isn't it sad that Hosan thought that Buenos Aires was Spanish for good food, a plate of tacos and burritos perhaps. So Kehoe's son called Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is one of the capitals of one of the South American countries. So Kehoe's son thought that Buenos Aires, a city, was Spanish for good food. Right? Buenos Aires is a Spanish name. So Kehoe's son thought that Buenos Aires was Spanish for good food, a plate of tacos and burritos, perhaps. Tacos and burritos, they're Mexican foods, right? And that doesn't sound strange to Ho. So doesn't Ho think it's strange? That's what Sophie asks. If students know history, if they memorize names, places, and facts, they give themselves material which to think, criticize, evaluate, and draw conclusions about social and economic conditions. So rote memorization has a very important role according to Sophia, and that is, if students are taught to memorize names, places, and facts, they give themselves material with which to think. They can think about what goes on in their life, what goes on in the world. They can criticize objectively. They can evaluate things. You can evaluate situations and draw conclusions about social and economic conditions. Right? They can draw conclusions about society and the economy. For example, the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait had a lot of impact on other countries. So at that time, the Middle East, that is Iraq and Kuwait, were at war. Iraq had just invaded Kuwait, and the US stepped in and sent its own army to suppress the invasion, probably because of oil at that time. The main bone of contention was the oil that the Middle East is rich in. So the children would have been able to draw the reason for the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait and the impact it had on other countries like the US. If they had known about, what Iraq was famous for, oil, what Kuwait was famous for, oil, and so on and so forth. Okay, if someone does not know the geography or the history of these places and the relationship of the rival countries with other nations, that person cannot fully understand the influence the event has on the world and on his or own country at the same time. So, see, if the US enters the war in the Middle East, then a person in the US cannot fully understand the influence the event had. The event we're speaking about is the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait, and that event, what influence it had on the US, what influence that invasion had on the world, what influence it had on the US. So, rote memorization plays a very important role according to Sophia. It gives them material with facts to which to think, evaluate, and criticize. The focus on using imagination can have negative consequences. So, imagination, by its very definition, it is something apart from fact. So, we to use the imagination creatively, one of the ways is you can have two facts and you can bring into being a third fact based on the two facts. So one of the ways in which this was used in the real world is the development of the computer. They had the typewriter and they had the television. They put the two together and they formed the personal computer. Now we have the laptop and the mobile phone. So that is creative use of imagination, the use of creative use of facts. But to teach everything imaginatively, this is like building a castle in the air. So it can have negative consequences. In my chemistry class in an American high school, for example, our teacher gave us a limited number of instructions and expected us to do everything else needed to conduct the experiment. So in the chemistry class, the chemistry teacher gave them a limited number of instructions and expected the students to do everything by themselves. Students who had never had chemistry before did the chemical experiments with more ease than I did, due to their imagination and previous experience in other experimental classes. So, students who had already participated in these experimental classes, they did the experiment with more ease. However, they did not know why things happened the way they did because they did not have enough chemistry background to understand and interpret the results of the experiments. So, but they did not know the reason why things happened in the experiment because they did not have enough facts. If all classes were like that, then the only thing students would gain is a lot of dispersed and unorganized and superficial information and not real knowledge. So, if all things were to be taught creatively, then what would happen is the children would have a lot of dispersed, but it's spread out. The knowledge they get is dispersed, is spread out over a large area. It will be unorganized and it will be superficial. And it won't be real knowledge according to Sophia. Hope was raised by having to memorize things and learn by heart information he may never have used in his life. So Kiho was raised in Indonesia. He had to memorize things and learn by heart. He had to memorize information he may never have used in his life. For example, he may never have used the formula of algebra. He may never have used the formula of trigonometry. His son grew up in a school system where practical information is more desirable than any other kind of information. But Kiho's son grew up in a school system where practical information is more desirable than any other kind of information. Our public education certainly is not perfect, but it's a great deal better than any other, is a conclusion of Jose. So the American public education system is certainly not perfect, but it's a great deal better than any other system of education, is how Kehoe concludes his essay. It is clear that Ho has a definite opinion about the system he prefers. So Kehoe is clear about that he prefers the American system of education. However, Sophia says, I am not able to do that. So she says that she cannot wholeheartedly support the creative approach to education. She says, on the one hand, I believe in memorizing things, in having to learn history, in having to know geography and literature, because these subjects not only serve as the tools people need to face life in a more global way, but they also sharpen the mind and expand points of view. So she says the advantages of memorizing things is that you have to learn history, you have to know geography and literature, because they are the subjects which serve as tools and they help people face life in a more global way. In a more global way means that all the facts that we learn are applicable anywhere in the world. So the facts of physics that we learn, they're applicable in the US, they're applicable in the UK, they're applicable in Australia. So we have to learn facts which are, universal. And not only are they universally applicable, they also sharpen the mind. So the more you memorize, the sharper the mind becomes and expands points of view. On the other hand, I think that schools should provide students with challenges, competition, and opportunities for creativity. But on the other hand, she also says that the creative approach to education also has an advantage, and schools should provide students with challenges. The schools should provide children with competition and opportunities for creativity. So she is on the middle ground. She doesn't say that the rote memorization is the best, or she doesn't say that creativity is the best, but we must take the advantages or we must take the plus points of both systems of education and integrate them. Schools that lack these stimuli to be creative should develop them. Students need opportunities to get involved in things they may be good at but never had the chance to discover. So by teaching different subjects that teach students are interested in, it will give them opportunity to be creative. So it may give them a chance to develop their talents, to utilize their talents, and discover what they are good at. So this is the conclusion of Sophia's Skoufaki, right? So Sophia, what she does is she takes the plus points of both rote memorization and the creative approach used in American schools, and she integrates them and says that both have their advantages and both should be used in the school systems. So that is the end of the essay. Thank you.